EU-China, Europe-China think tank exchange in challenging times, prospects and innovations. A bit of a background, of course, I think some of the ideas discussed in the previous panels really add to the context we are going to be in moving forward. So one of the panelists just said that global challenges require global perspectives. And today in this panel, especially the conversation on China-Europe think tank cooperation is also about how we Chinese think tanks and European think tanks can, in light of the context we find ourselves in. 2021, we are still facing COVID, climate change is a major issue, so many other issues and so many avenues of cooperation that exist today. There is immense scope for think tanks on both sides to cooperate. So for that, we have a panel that requires barely an introduction. We have with us experts from Chinese think tanks, from different parts of Europe. So we will have multiple perspectives in this session. And another idea that we would like to touch on is also how can think tanks overall think of ways to be more effective? One of the concepts discussed was we are living in an age of abundance. So really, in this age of abundance of information, how can think tank professionals conceive better ways to give out a more effective message? One thing I would like to add to this, just before we move on to introduce our panel, is that think tanks, I feel, are really the space between, that synergy that we are looking for. Think tanks have the ability to deepen the discourse, deepen the quality of mutual understanding, and really guide the way forward for policymakers, for governments, and generally for media and publics in general. So think tanks have a major role, responsibility, and immense capability to contribute. And that's why this forum is also another opportunity for us to contribute towards that end. So without further ado, let me introduce our panel. We have firstly a Director of Department of European Studies of China Institute of International Studies, Cui Hongjian, who is joining us here. Then we have CCG Senior Fellow, Vice Chairman of China Society for WTO Studies, Ho Chengguo. And then we have Executive Vice President, ISPI, and Chair of T20 Italy, who is joining us online, Paolo Magri. Can you, yes. We also have the Senior Consulting Fellow of the Asia Pacific Program, Chatham House, Tim Summers, who is also joining us online. And then we have Managing Director of New Horizons Project, former Director of Policy at Friends of Europe Online, Shada Islam. Welcome. Associate Vice Pro-Chancellor of Deakin University, Jean Monnet, Chair of Professor, Vice Chairman, EU Asia Center, Shen Wei, who is joining us online from Shanghai. Yes. And we have with us CCG Senior Fellow, former Director General of MOFCOM Department of European Affairs, Sun Yongfu. Welcome. So welcome all of you. We have a diverse panel that really requires barely an introduction. Let's try to address ways in which Chinese and European think tanks can cooperate and conceive better ways. We will firstly start with about 5 minutes of opening remarks per panelist, and then move forward to a second round of comments and views and responding to each other. So without further ado, let me invite Director of Department of European Studies, China Institute of International Studies, Mrs. Cui Hongjian. A bit of a deeper introduction. Mrs. Cui Hongjian is non-resident senior fellow of CCG, and he is also, Dr. Hongjian has been associated with the China Institute of International Studies. He holds a doctorate degree from Peking University, and he has also served as First Secretary and Director of the Office of Political Affairs in Chinese Consulate General in India as well as Jamaica. So the floor is yours. If you can think of guiding us to understand how European and Chinese think tanks can work in a better way, and what really are the avenues of cooperation?
Thank you, Madam. Also, thank you for this opportunity. It's not only a kind of really valuable occasion for exchange, and also a good time to say hello to some old friends from our European Indeed, I take the importance of the question is, firstly, how could we have a look at the current situation between China and Europe? And then how could we do something as a think tanks? I think firstly, undoubtedly, most of us now feel a little bit more uncomfortable than before. Not only because of COVID-19 or some disconnection, the chance, some other. I think now everybody understands what happened recently. There are more political interference, into this kind of exchange between think tanks, and also not only the think tanks, and also between economies from China and Europe. So I think that we should ask ourselves maybe for 3 questions before we started to discuss the situation or the future for us. Firstly, we feel comfortable or not. I just answer the question. Definitely, no. So how could we change it? If it's possible for us to, just like the European Union recently mentioned, that we need to find an approach, which means that go back to the future. So how could we go back to the future? It's a very, a stranger approach. Go back, but with the direction of future. The second question is, this current situation is a sustainable one or not? If it's not, we need to, stop it immediately as soon as possible. Or maybe we need to have some more innovation, we have some more big mind to change it, some negative fact behind it. The third is, the current situation would be, the mutual beneficial. If it's not, we need to try to understand if there is a better approach to achieve the common goals between China and Europe. So yes, I think that as a think tanks, we need to take some more responsibilities. But now, this current environment gives some more, especially the tests for encouragement, for some more confidence, especially as scholars, as research fellows, how could we uphold our professional sense and also kind of encouragement. On this point, I appreciate Madam Shada, my old friend. I read your article recently. You did a good job to rethink about so-called summit of democracy. You try to require more and more scholars, especially from European countries, to rethink what real means, the meaning of the democracy, especially it's very necessary for European countries to rethink that what's the achievement, what's the faults for this current political situation in Europe. I think once we have some more, joint or common understanding about the real situation, by upholding our professional sense, I think that there will be space for us to have some more cooperative works and also some maybe bright future for this relations between China and Europe. I should stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tsui. Really, I think it's important to understand what a vital role think tanks and basically scholars, experts on both sides have to play in nurturing that direction moving forward. So thank you for your opening remarks. And now let's invite CCG Senior Fellow and Vice Chairman of China Society for WTO Studies, Mr. Ho Chenko. If you could share within 5 minutes, really the role think tanks on both sides, thinkers on both sides can play, and also if you can talk a bit more about the WTO and economic cooperation, how that can be an incentive for both sides to deepen their cooperation.
Thank you, moderator. And Good afternoon, panelists and participants. When we talked about the Sino-European issues, I think DAI, B, or BIT, the change in bilateral investment treaty, that is a landmark event at the end of last year, promoted by President Xi and Chancellor Merkel. China and Europe completed the negotiation of the bilateral investment treaty, and we were close to signing the treaty. We just initialed the agreement with the condition that the European Parliament needs to ratify it. But this year, because of human rights sanctions in Xinjiang, the European Commission decided to put off the ratification of this treaty unlimitedly. We cannot say that the US and Europe have developed an alliance and Europe has shifted towards the US. So everything is changing. Actually, the bilateral investment treaty is valuable and attractive and is welcomed by businesses and can bring trade and investment benefits to both sides. However, the EU Commission's attitude is very important, and Germany's attitude is also key because there is differences in European Commissions. The pragmatic people believe that we should have the BIT take effect so that it can bring economic benefits. And for those people against China, they want to take a tough stance. And news says that Schultz sent a positive signal of strengthening cooperation with China. At least he says that he will follow Chancellor Merkel's policy to engage with China. So that is a good sign. Whether the treaty will take effect will depend on a number of questions or a number of factors. One is the Sino-US negotiations on trade. And the result of that negotiation will have a big impact on EU. If the US get a lot of benefit, Europe will have some ideas, and that would be an opportunity for enhanced cooperation between China and Europe. And it will also depend on the progress of high-level opening up by China. China said that it has applied to and will participate in CPTPP, and with stress testing, if we can stimulate reform and opening up in China, then our market will be more attractive. You see the 1.4 billion people market, but China is really attractive in that will continue to make the market active and can move towards prosperity. And then the chance of enhancing cooperation between China and Europe will increase. It will also depend on the European Commission. I think that both sides need to find a good way to decrease tension, and I believe the opportunity will come up. And China and Europe have a lot of common ground in WTO reforms. So China can take the initiative to engage with Europe and to decrease tension. I'm quite optimistic about China-Europe cooperation because we all see that this cooperation can bring commercial value and will have a positive impact on growth on both sides and in the world. So we hope that we can overcome the difficulties.
I think this is also a perfect time to now engage one of our European guests, Mr. Paolo Magri in Italy. Can you hear us? You're muted. So,
Yes,
yes,
I can hear you.
we can hear you and we can see you. Welcome, welcome. This is
Inviting.
thank you for joining. And so, Mr. Ho, I think the points that you brought up about the comprehensive agreement on investment, there's so many bilateral issues. Pragmatic cooperation is possible, seems logical, and it should be the way forward between China and Europe. So I think, Mr. Paolo, if you could also highlight in your view, what are the existing challenges? What is holding both sides back? What needs to be addressed by think tanks? And more specifically, if you can also talk about, as chair of T20 Italy, what do you think are the expected outcomes of the Rome Summit and COP26 in general, where China and Europe see cooperation? How is that really going moving forward?
Thank you. As previously mentioned, the role of think tank is to deepen the discourse, even when there are tensions or different opinions. And that's why I will concentrate my 5 minutes on the T20 exercise, which I chaired till last month, which was an exercise in which countries which were debating and fighting on some issues were forced to join forces. They sometimes did not find agreement, but in parallel, as you know, the T20 was the think tanks exercise addressing the same topic and the same issues. So what are the lessons learned? As the idea bank, T20 is the idea bank of the T20, of the G20. Our main goal was to provide leaders with, that's our role, that's our think tank's role, research-based and actionable policy recommendation. But we have to be honest, we need to acknowledge the think tanks sometimes have limited influence on the G20, but this cannot let us down. We have, and we did, we have to try hard to have our voice heard. How did we try to have our voice, our think tank's voice heard in Italy, in our T20? First of all, we tried to synchronize our work with the G20 schedule. And this is a lesson for think tanks. If you want to be heard, you have to understand leaders or politicians' agenda and try to get into that agenda and not try to have them join your agenda. So we try to synchronize with the schedule of the G20 working groups, and then we try to have timely joint statement or official statement before the official meeting were on. We made altogether dozens of proposals, but again, let's ask ourselves, have they been heard in Rome or then Glasgow at the COP26? And let's have an evaluation, an honest evaluation. There has been some degree of convergence in a number of policy areas, but there is a but. In each area there is a but, and I will try to say the good point and the but. On global health, the G20 endorsement of the One Health approach is in line with what our recommendations were. But this is the first but. On vaccine, political leader all pledged to vaccinate 70% of the world population, but reality tells another story so far. On debt, point two, the G20 commitment to extend debt service suspension initiative go in the direction supported also by the G20 community. But there is a but. But these measures are too limited in time and scope. And if, for example, interest rates rise soon in the United States, we will have a problem. Third, on recovery policy, the T20 had suggested a significant issuance of new IMF special drawing rights. And we all know that an unprecedented 600 billion issuance is now a reality. But, again, the third but, only 3% of the new SDR went to low-income countries. On green transition, the fourth point, a G20 working group on sustainable finance was indeed created, and leaders promised to provide developing countries with 100 billion per year until 2025. But the fourth but, the 100 billion pledge exists since 2009, and so far only not limited, two-thirds of the amount has been disbursed. And on international trade and investment, my last point, unfortunately, the MC12 was postponed, and at the G20 summit, commitment to reform the WTO were too vague. T20 shed light also on new issues such as multilateral regulation of digital trade and other, but advancement, to be honest, again, on this issue still seem negligible. All in all, this is the end of my comment. Some G20 proposals were turned into reality by G20 and COP26. Others are still in standby or not considered at all. But again, the fifth part, I think the T20, and by saying T20, I mean think tanks, may offer good recipe for the international cooperation among think tanks from China, the EU, and beyond. A recipe with two key ingredients. First, joint evidence-based and policy-oriented research. Second, inclusivity and dissemination, also by engaging other actors. We were glad, for example, to have Chinese think tanks heavily involved in our T20. CCG, CCAS, Choyang Institute, SIIS, adding their ingredients to the recipe. A good recipe indeed, we should be further enriched and possibly replicated beyond the G20. And I think workshop and seminar and conference like this may be helpful in this direction. I'm afraid I cannot stay till the very end of the session, and I want to excuse myself with everyone. I am currently in Bahrain, and my session here has been anticipated, and there is some overlapping, but I will stay with you as much as I can.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Paolo. And really, that comment, the introduction of the many buts, which I think is an important addition to our conversation. On the one hand, we are talking about addressing gaps of understanding. How can think tanks on both sides really deepen their cooperation and figure out multiple better ways of working together? Like you, in conclusion, mentioned, we need to find objective and inclusive ways to cooperate. But another aspect that both sides need to work on, and this is something that this panel also seems to, we want to highlight, is how can, in essence, think tanks become more effective? And that's why those gaps, so think tanks, we always say, are here to give better policy recommendations, but also identifying the gaps between policies and the practical implementation is an important part of the role of think tanks, and guiding governments or it's easy to make very ambitious goals, but following them, having practical and achievable goals, that's something that think tanks can also help with. So thank you, and also for illustrating how the T20 is a good example for better and practical think tank cooperation. Now we have from Shanghai, Mr. Shen Wei, who is Associate Vice Pro-Chancellor of Deakin University, Jean Monnet Chair of Professor and Vice Chairman EU Asia Center. He is also non-resident Senior Fellow of CCG. So Mr. Shen, your remarks and also how the EU Asia Center can be an example of what they've achieved, what we can learn from that experience. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and great to see you all, colleagues from Europe and China. And it's a pity we couldn't meet physically in this new normal, but I think we will have a very fruitful discussion. And the Europe-Asia Center is obviously very proud to be part of this discussion, and we are partner of CCG, and myself is a fellow of CCG. And I first of all want to address some of the challenges and difficulties we are living in. We are living in this unprecedented period. And I think there are a number of areas that we are facing challenges. First of all is the polarization of politics and the political landscapes. I think this is really important. It's increasingly becoming more difficult to be objective on everything. I think even for think tanks, the neutrality of think tanks are often questioned and even labeled. And secondly, we see an increasing frequency of tensions and fault lines in global governance, and that's also reflected in some downward spiral of diplomacy, such as the recent French reaction to AUKUS or the tension between China and Lithuania. And we also see that international relations diplomacy is increasingly driven by domestic and party interests, which increase this kind of uncertainties in our political approach. And third challenge I see is on the quality of journalism. We have Shada, who is an excellent journalist, an excellent think tanker, but obviously people like Shada are in short demand nowadays in our media. I think they're increasing bias and also fueled by this fake news and what some may call sensational reporting in media, which increase like worsening of public opinions or public misunderstandings. And I want to encourage you to read the article by Tim Summers, who just published in our journal. In the journal, I'm editor-in-chief of Asia-Europe Journal on British opinion of China. I think there's increasing deteriorization of public opinion among the major nations, which is causing concern. And lastly, I think that's also physical distance. We have a lot of events. We have a lot of online forums, but it's a kind of delicate area between quantity versus quality. I think the quality of interaction is somehow still limited due to the physical distance. Intermediaries and distance, even at high level like G20 or COP26, have made negotiation rather cumbersome, and that's the same for think tanks. And that's how we are battling with this kind of physical separation. So on the positive side, I think that gives us think tanks, including Europe Asia Center, an even more critical role in building trust through socialization of track 2 dialogue, track 1.2 dialogue, 2.5 dialogue, you name it, and to demystify our perceptions and approaches, and also ensure that we are not lost in translation in important bilateral and multilateral areas. So I just want to mention a few proposals that we are doing, and I propose the think tanks to work together. One is to do more evidence-based joint research. I think it's really important that we are not just working in our own area, on our national boundaries, but working collaboratively in research. This is done already in academia, but I think think tanks should also work more collaboratively. National boundaries. Secondly, I think we should work more with media, and I really encourage Shada to be a good example in this. Really working with media to see how we can build a higher and better quality media reporting. And thirdly is engage with academia. We see this somehow lacking. And for instance, in my journal, Asia-Europe Journal, we launched the policy forum working with think tankers, including the ETNC European Think Tank work on China, including with some leading think tanks in Europe and Asia. I think we need to engage with academia to broaden our audience. One more more is the people-to-people dialogue. We talk about people-to-people dialogue between nations, but I think we also need people-to-people dialogue between think tankers. How we can create job shadowing between think tankers. For instance, CCG colleagues can work in Chatham House for a short period to really have this socialization and face-to-face exchange of ideas, which is missing. The two more areas I want to propose is one is how we can work with power diplomacy, work with sub-state actors, which we see city-states, provinces are very active in building bilateral relations. We see the example of Quebec in Canada, but also in Australia, for instance, where I'm normally based. The state of Victoria is very active in building relations with China, for instance. So how think tanks can work with sub-state, city, and provincial actors in international dialogue. CCG is doing a lot, for instance, working with Chinese city and province. And last but not least, we have to think about our future is the youth and the youngsters. I think think tanks need to work in the policy area very successfully, but how we can engage with the young people is really important. This future and emerging leaders. So identifying college students or young professionals who are interested in international affairs and to seek their voice and participation in these multilateral, bilateral forums are really important. And again, I think CCG is doing quite a lot in this area, but I think think tanks in Europe and other parts of China should engage with the young people and how we can build this kind of youth linkage to our think tank. So this is I want to some of the challenges and some proposals I have in mind for Europe and China or Europe and Asia think tank collaboration, and I hope it's of interest to the audience and for the discussion later on. Thank you again for CCG for the invitation.
Thank you really. And I think especially there are unprecedented challenges in a way that we are facing globally, and think tanks are no exception. Those lack of face-to-face interactions, especially given that those side discussions, those dinners, the things that happen on the sides of face-to-face meetings really make a difference. And hopefully we can get back to that pace of face-to-face. But in the meantime, how can we make the best of the situation we are in? And I think also the suggestions, the recommendations, especially more media collaborations, how can we have higher quality media? Media really influences how people think, creates the inertia that of perceptions that media creates is something that requires more responsible media coverage. And I'm glad that we have up next Ms. Shada Islam. Before I go to Ms. Shada, I'll also quickly mention the comment on youth, where yes, even at CCG, the Global Young Leaders Dialogue is an example, and how younger voices who are not the future, but also the present, how can they be engaged in a better way? How can they be nurtured to play a more conducive role? This is something that think tanks can also come together to figure out. So with that, let's invite Ms. Shada Islam, who is Managing Director, New Horizons Project. And Ms. Shada, you have done a lot of, you're a journalist and also a think tanker. You have been mentioned a few times over the course of the panel already. So really your perspective on how to move forward, what can both sides really do to achieve better results? And if you have any cases, any examples from your own experience, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Zoon, and it's absolutely wonderful to see so many good friends there, even though we're online. But I really appreciate the fact that we can connect this way, and thank you also for your references. That was very kind of you. So Zoon, I'm going to just do this in two parts. First of all, I think most of what's been said, I actually do agree with. It's been a very challenging year for EU-China relations. I used to be a journalist, as you pointed out, following EU-China relations for the Far Eastern Economic Review, which was based in Hong Kong. And then when it shut down, unfortunately, I have to say, I became a think tanker, worked for European Policy Center, where I'm, again, senior advisor, and then for 9 years at Friends of Europe, setting up EU-China forum, EU-China think tank discussions, taking part in every single opportunity I had to actually engage with my colleagues in China, traveling there, going to Asia, meeting them in multilateral formats, but also bilateral. So this for me is most important. I have a hunger for information, and I need to know what's really happening on the ground. I think that's what's really missing in these COVID-19 times. My last visit was in 2019 to Hainan, actually, where I was with the CIRD for a few days. So it's been a challenging year, and it's been mentioned, it's about the comprehensive agreement on investments that is now frozen. It's about the tit-for-tat sanctions. It's about just a lot of uncertainty about where EU-China relations are headed. It's very volatile. It's always been a roller coaster kind of relationship, up and down. We know that. But for the moment, I have to confess, I've never seen it so fragilized and so weakened, if you like. And of course, the change that's taking place in Berlin leaves also sort of uncertainty hanging over us on the horizon. So how are we dealing with this? I think the real problem, and I have to be very, very honest with you, is the tit-for-tat sanctions. I think since China has reacted to European sanctions over Xinjiang by actually restricting the movement and sanctioning European think tanks and members of the European Parliament, I think that really casts a very dark shadow over this relationship, and soon has an impact on EU-China think tank discussions as well, because there is a sense of solidarity among European think tanks, and there is a sense that we could be next. So this has created, I would say, a certain degree of not just uncertainty but also anxiety about where this relationship is headed. Because I totally agree with what Zhu Hongjian and Wei Shen have said. We need to talk to each other, and online is just not enough. And this is, I think, the major problem we have at the moment. So the gloomy sort of landscape, the wider picture of EU-China relations casts a very dark shadow over what many of our think tanks want to do with China. I won't say there's a homogeneous kind of sentiment. Some of us are engaging, and some of us are actually not engaging. So there's no one joint position on this. So in this difficult environment, I think I totally agree that when the going gets tough, that's when think tanks have to get going. That's when the tough have to get going. It's extremely important to do that. And what we're seeing at the moment is a very conversation that we're having at EPC. I have to say we've continued our engagement. We've talked with the Chinese ambassador to the EU. We interviewed him just a few weeks ago, and it's very important that that kind of conversation continues. But I have to say that for many others, this idea that we can somehow still engage with China is driven by a certain degree of circumspection and an unwillingness to do so while these sanctions on members of European Parliament and while the sanctions on some European think tanks stay. Now, I think the way forward, and I'm going to be quite brief on this as well, I think it says ABC. I think we can work together through Azim. Azim is a format that not many people recognize or appreciate, and I think that is a mistake. Azim is a very important geopolitical format. It's been there for 21 years almost, and we need to be careful about just disregarding it and sort of thinking of it as something which is sort of a side,
if you like, something that you sort of just invest the minimal energy into. And if we are 53 partners in 51 countries,
plus ASEAN and the European External Action Service, members of this, we can really engage in a multilateral format, a bit like what Paolo was saying about T20. And I think ASEM would be a very important format platform to develop into this think tank dialogue. And there, once again, even if there are problems in a bilateral relationship, such as at the moment, if you like, between EU and China, within ASEM, we can talk because we have common agendas. I think the common agenda that we can have in ASEM is actually to talk about access to vaccines. T20 has done that, but I think we need to push. And I think it was unfortunate that we didn't have this discussion between among us before the summit that was held online at the end of November. We can talk about Afghanistan. This is something that most people sort of neglect. America has withdrawn, NATO has withdrawn, and Afghanistan has fallen off the radar of our journalists, as Wei Shen says. We have very short attention span, but I think we need to talk about Afghanistan and ways in which which we can work together for countering the looming and the very, very catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Then, of course, we also have joint interests in further developing Africa. And I think we should take our geopolitical competition out of that continent. That's what the Africans keep saying to me: work together, for God's sake. Don't work in parallel silos. So A for Azim, for Africa, Afghanistan, and access to vaccines. B is to stay balanced. And this is becoming extremely difficult, as Wei Shen has said. We are not driven by logic and rationality. We're being driven by emotion and ideology. And I think think tanks really, to be worthy of their name, should avoid that kind of ideology. But hey, we live in the real world, and this is something that is becoming very difficult to be balanced in this very polarized environment that we're in. So, and C is for compete and cooperate. We live in a world where it's a mix and match world, really. For me, there's no question of a binary choice, and I think most Europeans would agree. We're not going to choose between the US and China, but we're going to have a mix and match world. We will cooperate when necessary, when important, especially on common global goods, and there will be competition on some areas as well. And I think one area that is another C where we can and should be working together is connectivity. Now, the focus is very much on the Belt and Road Initiative, and we all know the reactions to that, the envy, but also the skepticism. Now we have the global gateway that Brussels has come up with as well. And of course, there are many other connectivity initiatives as well soon. So where I think think tanks should be working together, and I'm trying to do that on a bilateral level with some Asian and European think tanks, is to try and come forward with an agenda for global connectivity norms and standards, what we call a multilateral agenda for connectivity. Now, people will say that's too visionary, it's impractical, it's never going to work, but hey, that's the way it is. Think tanks have to dare, they have to be brave, they have to be creative, innovative, and go down roads that other people are not willing to go down, just because we believe very much that if we stop this competition on connectivity, if we work together, it will be for the common global good in parts of Asia, in Africa, and elsewhere as well. And of course, C stands for climate change as well, but that has been talked about already, so I won't go into it. So there you go, Zune A, B, C, and as I said, when the going gets tough, that's when I think the top have to get going. Track 2, track 1.5, and we can be creative and innovative going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was really a very comprehensive analysis in a way of the challenges that both sides are facing. And first of all, how there is really a reduced space for moderate voices. That is something which has escalated, and lack of face-to-face interactions has further increase the effect of this sentiment. But the ABC format, the ABC solutions, a way forward that you propose are really very interesting, especially multilateral. A multilateral setting can keep the focus on issues that we share. Even if bilateral misunderstandings exist, a multilateral format can maintain the dialogue and needed work that needs to be done together. And otherwise, like, yes, cooperation, connectivity, how can think tanks, like you mentioned, multilateral agenda for connectivity, how can think tanks take this kind of an initiative? And this also takes us to the question, sometimes I think it's come up a few times in this very panel, that media, we need more objective media as well. Journalism needs to be better. And in a way, think tanks also, how can think tanks be nurtured into living up to that expectation of them, which is really to contribute to objective, scientific, and cooperative analysis that's not agenda driven, but really working towards the idea of a common future. So this is something that is expected of think tanks, like you mentioned, balanced. They need to live up to their name. So how do we really nurture that? Multilateral settings or multilateral formats can perhaps play a conducive role. With that, let's welcome Tim Summers, Senior Consulting Fellow of the Asia Pacific Program, Chatham House. Tim Summers, you are based in Hong Kong. Yes,
that's right.
Yes, so let's listen to your perspective. So many challenges have been brought up, possible solutions, very good solutions. As a British scholar based in Hong Kong, I think you can also also provide additionally a unique perspective on how can both sides really work together, and how do we address those heightening tensions, so to speak? Who should take the lead? How can think tanks take the lead in this environment?
Well, thank you very much, Zoom, for that kind introduction, and thank you to CCG for inviting me to join this very interesting and stimulating discussion. Actually, what I'm going to say probably contributes a little bit more to the challenges side of the ledger than the solutions. But perhaps if we have time for more comments, I can try and say something on the solutions. I wanted to talk a bit about the role of think tanks, and I totally agree with the panel introduction that think tanks have a profound role to play in guiding the future discourse, in promoting dialogue, and in engaging in joint research. But the question I want to address is whether they really are currently playing that role or not. So a little bit of navel gazing, a little bit of looking at our own record at the moment. And I'm going to do that by looking at the case of some recent debates about China and China policy in the UK. And in short, my conclusion is that established think tanks are not as prominent or influential as they should be. Instead, the shaping of discourse and policy ideas is being driven by other actors, by new kids on the block. In a paper a couple of years ago, I looked at the role of think tanks in policy debates about China in the UK, and concluded that in some of the issues that were current at that time, there was a bit of a tendency for policy research to prioritise security concerns over economic opportunities. That paper focused on the major established foreign policy think tanks in the UK, Chatham House, RUSI, and IISS. But I also noted that the context was one of wider challenges for think tanks. Policy research is no longer the preserve of think tanks. Universities, consultancies, lobby groups, and others have entered the policy research space, bringing with them a diverse range of agendas, funding models, and political relationships. The world of social media and the instant and invasive communication it brings has further, quotes, democratized policy debates by decentering them from traditional experts. And this phenomenon, I think, has become clearer over the last couple of years. I don't mean to dismiss the traditional think tanks at all. They continue to do important work as platforms for public debate and closed-door discussions. But if we look at three significant China-related policy decisions by the British government over recent years, I would say in all three cases, the role played by the major traditional think tanks was marginal. Those three are the decision on Huawei and 5G, the decision on sanctions, and the decision on the Hong Kong British National Overseas Passport visa scheme. So looking first at Huawei, the reasons for the UK government's eventual about-turn on Huawei and 5G are complex. But clearly there was lobbying by Conservative Party politicians, there were voices in the media. But on this topic, I think the traditional think tanks were quite quiet. One fellow from RUSI, one of the think tanks, was a prominent voice in repeating the idea that Huawei posed a threat. But the more significant input came from places like the Henry Jackson Society and the China Research Group of Conservative MPs. For example, in May 2019, Henry Jackson Society issued quite an influential report called Defending Our Data on Huawei, the 5G issue, and the Five Eyes. The second issue, sanctions, and this is a decision that Shada has already referred to. The decision to sanction Chinese officials over allegations relating to Xinjiang is another example of new voices dominating the debate. Again, in the UK, it was members of parliament from the China Research Group. It was the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, another lobby group, that were prominent. The traditional think tanks have been pretty silent on this issue, and even some good work by scholars at RUSI on the problems of sanctions appear to have little impact on the policy debate. Then the third example is the Hong Kong British National Overseas visa scheme. This is a good example of agenda setting and successful lobbying, in this case primarily by the advocacy group Hong Kong Watch, supported again by the China Research Group, IPAN, and others. there was little evidence of this being a central issue for the traditional foreign policy think tanks, and the occasional op-ed by some of their researchers, including myself, did not make much impact. The agenda was set by the lobby group. What to conclude from these three admittedly controversial cases, and someone may argue they are not typical, they're not the most important issues in British government policy towards China, but I think they have all been quite dominant in the discussion over the last year or so. The obvious conclusion to me is that it is the advocacy groups, with their zeal and their focus, which are having the most direct impact on policy making in the case of China policy in the UK at the moment. So these include the groups I've already mentioned: Hong Kong Watch, IPAC, the China Research Group, the Henry Jackson Society. The latter describes itself as a think tank, but I think it probably operates more as an advocacy group with a clear political agenda and a highly critical approach to China at that. The representatives of these new voices may reject my characterization. They perhaps would argue that many of their policy demands and suggestions are not met. That itself could be part of the lobbying game. But if we step back and look not just at the specific policies, but also at the broader trends in the UK's China policy at the moment, it seems to me that traditional think tanks are being sidelined by the new kids on the block. So I'll leave it there for the moment too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tim Summers. One of the aspects that we also have brought up before during this panel, I think it's been a major part of the conversation during the entire forum. How can think tanks become more effective, more relevant? We are talking about the age of abundance of information. Are think tanks really making a difference? And I think that is a big question in which globally, and especially between China and Europe for the sake of this panel, we need to have that conversation. How can think tanks on both sides, not advocacy groups, real think tanks on both sides, think about becoming more significant in terms of their impact? That requires a fundamental rethinking of how think tanks operate and engage, which is also why Ms. Islam's contribution is also very important. Engaging media is important. Young people is important. So these are the innovative ways forward. So the two aspects, we have a situation where both sides are not talking as much as they should. Let's address that. And also, how can think tanks in general make more of an impact? So Mr. Sun Yong-fu, CCG Senior Fellow, former Director General of MOFCOM, Department of European Affairs. Your comments on the debate so far.
Thank you very much. China-Europe relations started from 1975. It's been 46 years. Our relations are mature, broad, and deep-going. And there are different kinds of dialogues between the two sides, dozens of them. Political dialogue, economic dialogue, trade dialogue, cultural, people-to-people, technology, educational, university-to-university dialogues, student-to-student exchanges. So it is a quite mature relationship. However, we have also seen that although our relations are deep-going and broad, it is also fragile. Why? Actually, this year is a year with a lot of difficulties for our bilateral relations. In 1989, if we go back to history, that was the first sanction by Europe against China, but that was only temporary. And then we entered a stage of rapid development of China-EU relations. But this year, because of the Xinjiang issue and the so-called value issues, the EU imposed sanctions against China again, and that triggered much reaction from China. And then our relations are strained again this year. I'm responsible for the practical part of the relations with Europe, the trade and commerce exchanges. I used to be Director General for the European Affairs Department of the Ministry of Commerce of China. Yes, now our relations are strained. However, I don't think the practical cooperation part of our relations has not been undermined. It is still going on very well. Last year, we suffered from the impacts of COVID-19, but the trade ties between China and Europe still grew. Last year, it was over 600 billion, up by 4.9%. This year, it was growing by 30%. In the first few months already, it reached over 670 billion. Yes, we are facing some complexities. However, the trade ties are going on smoothly. Last year, ASEAN surpassed the EU as the top trading partner to China. You know, the EU has been our top trading partner for 16 years, but it's not because of the shrinking of Europe economy, but because of Brexit, because it accounted for the decline of about 100 billion. What is bad is that the political relations may have an impact on our practical cooperation. Now, the business cooperation has been taken hostage by our bad political ties. So the interactions between the economic side and the political side is actually something negative for our common interests. It is bad for the cooperation between the businesses. It is bad for our public. We have tens of dialogues between the two sides. We have human rights dialogue, for example. But when we need it to play a very important role, it is not there. So some of the dialogues are not going on very well. So in that sense, the think tanks have a good space to play its role. So the think tanks can be more creative and they can provide suggestions and recommendations, practical recommendations to the European Council, for example, and also the Chinese think tanks can provide practical recommendations to the Chinese government. So how can we move out of this dilemma of our bilateral relations? I think think tanks can really do something to come up with some practical cooperation plans. And I think it is also important to have discussions and cooperation between the think tanks. You know, we are not acting on behalf of the governments. We are just providing some suggestions for the government's decision making. Yes, we already have tens of cooperation mechanisms between the two sides, but when they are not working very well, I think the think tanks really can play a valuable role to make up for it. They can provide long-term, constructive, and practical solutions to the government to inform the decision-making of the government. Now the political relations are strained. We need to incorporate the suggestions of the think tanks so that the bilateral cooperation will not be undermined by the human rights values or some other values and still keep our bilateral relations on the right track. I think that is really a challenging job for us. I do hope that the think tanks of the two sides can increase cooperation to provide practical cooperation plans for our cooperation.
Many very important points, I think, summing up, concluding in a way many of the issues that were brought up. And I think it's also significant to address how we know that think tanks are an open space for cooperation and so many friendly discussions amongst between scholars and experts on think tank platforms take place. But when it comes to policies, we may not see the impact of these conducive discussions on policies. So how convincing or effective can think tanks be is something we need to understand as well. So this is a common challenge, both sides have a lot of interest between China and Europe. And I think the cooperation between China and Europe is really, in general, an example and a stabilizing factor in the world. So the discussion of think tank cooperation and overall cooperation between China and Europe has deep implications on major issues of global governance as well. So to discuss this relationship, to enable better ways to make it work is something important on many fronts. So we have had like a first round of views, diagnoses, and also possible solutions. We do not have a lot of time left. So I think a last round of comments, maybe about 2 minutes each, after hearing other panelists as well. What are the key challenges? What do you think should be the focus on both sides moving forward? And maybe any key prediction or area of cooperation that you could identify based on your experience. So, Mr. Tsui, let's start with you.
Thank you for these last 2 minutes. Exactly, I try to conclude my points by responding to my friend Shada. I agree with you. We need to deal with some ABC issues. But I try to add some ABC after you mentioned. Firstly, yes, we need to take care of the cooperation in the frame of Azim, and we need to try to find more cooperation in Afghanistan, Africa, no problem. But I think especially from China's perspective, the other 2A, we need to also take care about it. Firstly, why is there Indo-Pacific strategy, not Asia-Pacific? Especially, in the background of the China-US competition and the American vision of Indo-Pacific strategy. So it's difficult for China to understand what's the difference between European attitudes and American one. The second A is I think we need to try to to have this real sense of the strategic autonomy. Yes, the next half of the year of the first half of next year, President Macron will take a rotating presidency of the European Union to promote strategic autonomy. China support strategic autonomy of the European Union. So I think it's a very, very good opportunity for both sides to forge, a high-level political consensus. The second, yes, how about the B? Balance. Yes, we need a balance. Much more, much better. But now the question is, what's the context of the balance? Once we have some more balance, we need, firstly, BIA. The BIA is another name of CAI, especially in China. But now, the European Parliament hijacked the CAI. So it produced a lot of imbalance for relations between China and the EU. Another B is BRI. Why don't we have some more cooperation? We could not just debate. We need to take use whose names. It's Asia. It's a Europe-Asia connectivity strategy. It's a BRI. It doesn't matter. The important thing is we need to have some more cooperation. The say is, yes, I agree with you. Maybe especially from European Union perspective. Now, cooperation and competition. But so far, I think China not yet accepted this so-called multi-faced definition from the European Union of China-EU relations. But yes, maybe the situation or reality is we have to face the very difficult situation, some cooperation and at the same time competition. But we need to find out the common goal is we must stop any dangerous tendency from the competition to confrontation. So we need to have very, very strong basic for stability for bilateral relations. The last to say is, yes, I think for both China and Europe, we need some more confidence. I think now it's a very interesting phenomenon, especially if we look at the medias from both sides. Is Europe with less confidence is looking what happened in a more confident China. So we need to understand what does it mean for real confidence. So I think for China, for Europe, yes, especially for think tank, we need to have some more opportunity. I hope that this time, this meeting would be a very good starting point, not only between me and Shada and between think tanks for both sides, for further discussion, for more consensus. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Tsui. Really, a deep understanding of each other's perspective is the starting point, and the end goal really is better consensus, more consensus on both sides. So, Mr. Hu, please.
Okay.
Within 2 minutes would be ideal.
Well, in terms of improving Sino-European relationship, we need to make effort in economic, political, and diplomatic terms. We can invite political figures from Europe, including some parliament members, to visit Xinjiang. Not long ago, we arranged some Japanese people to visit Xinjiang in order to reduce tensions around Xinjiang. And we should also engage with the new chancellor in Germany. China should be more active in engaging them so that at least we can keep faith. Schultz actually has given you the face by not blaming you in public. That's a good sign. And economically, there are many things we can do. EU can solve some problems such, for example, the clean energy equipment produced in Germany is very good. So we can increase import of such equipment from Germany. And we also need to import Airbus from France. So that is also a sign of goodwill, a sign of improving bilateral relationship. And then I think EU will respond positively. So that's my suggestion.
Let's now invite, because Paolo is not with us, so Tim Summers, please take the floor for 2 minutes. Your thoughts.
Thank you, Zoon. And there's a lot of challenges I think we've identified, but I think this discussion in itself has been useful in airing some of those challenges, some of those different perspectives. A number of speakers have made important points from different perspectives, I think, about the issues in EU-China relations that need to be addressed. So one thing we certainly should do is to try to engage in this sort of dialogue as frequently as we can, both in this sort of relatively open format, but I think also in more closed door, small group formats. And we have to bring to the table, I think, as many of those different perspectives as possible. Certainly in Europe, in the UK, which I follow most closely, the media, the political environment is very challenging at the moment for balanced analysis and discussion of things relating to China. But we need to keep, I think, pushing and trying to do as much of that as we possibly can. So perhaps that's slightly less than 2 minutes soon, but hopefully that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, unfortunately, I wish we had all the time possible, but unfortunately we're pressed for time. But that said, that really helps, and that adds to the kind of, I mean, we are all looking for consensus in the end, and identifying the challenges is an important part, and let's just propose possible solutions. So thank you, Tim Summers. Ms. Chada Islam, you've already given such a comprehensive idea on the way forward. Our other panelists have also responded to your comments. So within 2 minutes, what would be your wrap up? Maybe if you would also like to respond to some of the previous speakers.
Thank you very much, June. So I would say on sanctions, the tit for tat sanctions, we will have to move. Both sides will have to move and find a midway, because we've painted ourselves into a corner. A message that I've also sent to some high officials from China in recent discussions. We've painted ourselves into a corner, both sides, if I may say so. And without moving on that, I think it would be very difficult to have the kind of honest and frank exchanges that we all crave these days. I understand my old friend Kui Hongjian not being able to make sense of the Indo-Pacific strategy, but I have to say, Kui Hongjian, this is part of the geopolitical commission, and also if you look deeply into it, it's sharpening its focus on the Asia-Pacific. Names change, it's the new trend. I wouldn't make too much out of it. I think what's important in it is that it is an inclusive strategy going on the lines of what ASEAN is saying and doing, and not the others in the region. Also, the point made about let's have the trade word, the trade side of things is moving forward very well. Let's not talk about values. For the EU, it's very difficult to compartmentalize interests and values. And this discussion, as you all know, friends, is going to go on and on. It's not going to change. Tim made a very good point about advocacy groups and other sort of consultancies and other private entities that are on the scene. He talked about Britain. I have to say it's very much true here as well. And I think this is something we should all be very cognizant of. The strategic autonomy discussion, yes, friends, it's a very important part of what the EU is doing. It's also, I have to say, something that the Americans are not very fond of.
See it as something which is
runs counter to the spirit of the transatlantic alliance. And so you have to understand that
will change as we go
forward. And finally, the Belt and Road Initiative, yes, absolutely, let's work together. I think it has to be done through the multilateral connectivity agenda that I am suggesting. Looking forward, I hope 2022 will be a better year for EU-China relations, but I have to say at this point in time, I am not
about it. I wish
things were different, but I have to be realistic. We live in a very polarized world, a very emotional world, and I'm not that upbeat about what lies ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Lam. Mr. Shunwei, your final comments, conclusions.
Thank you. It's really difficult to conclude at this stage. It's always good to have this frank discussion among old friends from Europe, China. It's challenging, but I think encouraging that we can have this frank discussion together among think tankers. I agree with my Chinese colleagues that it's really important to keep the communication lines open and to have a multi-dimensional approach to the complexity of Europe-China relations. I also think going through this discussion today, we just have a lot to work on between Europe and China. Besides all this climate change, I think we discussed some really important areas. As Shada, your proposal about getting the think tanks to do something more creative, standard setting for this connectivity agenda, that's really important. I mean, if we can even get back to the basic definitions of some terms and norms, that will be already a start. And bringing sustainability dimension aside, and also look at rule setting for digital governance in this connectivity area. And also in terms of third area collaboration, Africa is mentioned, Azim is mentioned, but even closer to Europe's border, the West Balkans, that's also a very important area, and particularly in the multilateral platform. And multilateral organization, we need to work together to restore confidence in these multilateral bodies. And last but not least, on Tim's talk, I think we are faced enormous challenges as think tankers, and in our marginalized position, or how we can respond to the future agenda setting. But I think we have advantages, which is partnership, alliances, and also quality of the work that we do. So we need to work in maintain our traditional advantages, but also maybe look at smart specialization areas who can make a difference rather than focus in the whole spectrum of agenda. So thank you once again for CCG for the opportunity. I really appreciate this conversation. I hope we can keep the conversation further, and hopefully one day offline, face to face as well.
Hopefully, we also look forward to that. Thank you. Lastly, please.
My personal view is that political relationship and values should not be confused with pragmatic cooperation, because China has never changed its political system since the founding of the PRC in 1949. It has not affected our pragmatic cooperation. Now we are each other's second largest trading partner. And as to CAI, I'm not optimistic about its coming back very soon, but I think that both sides, including think tanks, should work hard to promote CAI, because it is the first time that Europe gets this openness commitment from China before the United States, not only in trading goods, but also in trade services and in labor standards, environmental standards, etc. So this is the first time, and losing this opportunity is a big loss to Europe and a big loss to pragmatic cooperation between China and Europe. So from government and think tank perspective, we should continue to push forward to resume CAI and get it rectified.
All of our panelists, all of our participants, our partners. I think just to conclude quickly, I'll bring a little bit of a personal experience. I'm from a Belt and Road country, and a few years ago, about 2.5 years ago, I wrote a paper on how Europe, the EU, and China together, the Belt and Roads Manifestation in Pakistan, can really benefit from China's investments, and also because we traditionally have had experience cooperating with the EU, with Europe in general. So the idea of compartmentalizing between values and interests will take us towards the realization that maybe both sides have a lot to cooperate on, including the BRI, including many other trade between the two, but also there's a world out there which can benefit immensely from better cooperation between China and Europe. All of our participants today brought unique perspectives and very useful perspectives to add to the discussion, and the broader idea of how think tanks in general can move forward, which is the theme of today of the 6th China Forum on Global Think Tank Cooperation. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, all of you, for joining us online for our panel here. And let's look forward to continuing this kind of exchange, positive exchange.
So distinguished guests from Europe and Shanghai, we have the final but important section of the forum. Please keep online. So welcome CCG Vice President Vic Legault to give us a conclusion speech.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Zoom. Thank you, the distinguished experts of this panel. I think this forum can last for many, many more hours, but we need to wrap it up for today. So it is my great privilege to wrap it up. And I'm very happy that throughout the day, lots of ideas have been presented, lots of brainstorming. And I'm truly confident that CCG staff will collect all these data points and come up with written reports about what has been presented, what has been discussed. I would say today's forum is truly a global forum for innovation of think tanks, for innovation of how think tanks should operate, of innovation of how think tanks should staff with experts, and what kind of expertise and experience will be necessary for promoting the growth of think tanks, not only in China, but across borders with many other countries in the world. You know, after listening to all the wonderful ideas and remarks, I'm walking away with a firm belief that the world and mankind should not be forced to choose between the United States versus China. That is actually a false choice. And that is a choice that many countries will need to refuse to pick and choose. I think the real choice before mankind is war versus peace, or growth and development versus ossification and lack of innovation. I think that should be the real choice. If any country is promoting war, we all need to be opposed to that. If any country is standing for peace and development, I think regardless of our political system or ideology or values, we all need to promote that. So I truly believe the real choice is definitely not between China and the United States, but between war versus peace, development versus ossification. And also, allow me to add another point. I think the so-called destiny or destined to war, as some scholar in the United States has proposed, is the false destiny for China and the United States. That's not the real destiny. I think the real destiny for China and the United States is the inevitable peace, because I think all the precedents that distinguished professor has analyzed involve wars in the pre-atomic age. But now between China and the United States, these two powers are not pre-atomic powers. These two countries are atomic powers. So I would say all the precedents, all the analogy, all the so-called Thucydides trap, etc., no longer should be applicable to two great nations like China and the United States. By default, it's because they are both atomic powers. So let's believe in the real destiny between China and the United States. Let's don't fall victim to the false destiny of destined to war. If China and the United States are destined to war, let's all sell our house and disappear into the bunker, because that will truly be Armageddon for mankind. So again, in Chinese, I would say, 今天真的是我们全球智库的盛会。
In Chinese, I would like to say today is a wonderful event for global think tankers. We have representatives from over 30 global think tanks who are with us today online. We have talked about many topics, think tanks' role in international narration, etc. And we also have representatives from international organizations, embassies, and Chinese think tanks, as well as friends from the media from both China and other countries. And this forum has been live online on many platforms, for example, CCG official account, etc. I believe it will be very impactful. It will be quite consequential. We have been brought together, the representatives of think tanks, for 6 years. I think this CCG's forum, the China Global Think Tank Innovation Forum, is really an innovation itself. We will have to call it a day now, but I think tomorrow will be even more wonderful. I hope that tomorrow or next time you will still be with us, either online or offline. Again, I want to thank you all for your participation. Thank you for being with us tomorrow. We will be meeting you both online and offline too. And tomorrow we will still have more discussions online, and you are all welcome to scan the QR code for live streaming. I would like to kindly remind you of leaving the headsets on your seats when you leave. Thank you very much. I appreciate your cooperation. That's the end of the conference.